Greetings! Welcome to the punctibyte for the week of February the 4th. I hope you all had an awesome weekend. We traveled with the ski team to New Mexico, and the most awesome thing about it was that it was the first time that most of our athletes had ever been to New Mexico. So I was reminded that one of our central goals in coaching really is to allow students to experience new places, and it really was a weekend where we did that. So it's difficult to transition back into school and to remind ourselves that in fact time is flying by. So on this week of February the 4th is actually a busy week because it's the very first Gen Micro lecture exam. So there's going to be a lot happening, and I thought I would go ahead and remind you that not only do we have that lecture exam on Tuesday, but we've also got Lab 4 and 5 that most of us will be doing this week. Of course, T on Thursday, you'll be progressing along to Lab 6, so I'll try to say just a few words about that lab as well. Amy and Mara, it's your turn for Open Lab, so I'll plan to see you there on Friday, or somebody who might be taking your place on Friday. I will be here all week this week through Open Lab, so no need to worry about having more fun than usual with a substitute TA, and I hope all of you guys loved Chelsea. She's rockin' cool. So just a few notes on scheduling. You'll expect your students to be turning in their gram stain reports 1 week from the time that you signed them. So for most of you, that would be on either the 6th or the 7th, though T students would be submitting that on the 5th. Remember that the assignment description in their lab notebook doubles as your grading key, and in every respect that grading key gives you a cheat sheet for how to grade those reports. There is some additional helpful information on your TACD, and I do find that with grading, consistency is the #1 thing. So that means that if you as a TA are grading one section within the report, you should always be the person to grade that same section on everyone's report. So maybe, for example, this week, Elias says that he'll grade the introduction, and he allows T to grade maybe the method section of the report. In which case, make sure that Elia grades the introduction on all of those and T grades methods on all of them so that there's consistency across the board. I also find that it's really helpful as you're grading to jot down notes about what constituted a deduction, so that when you take that deduction on one person's paper, you can make sure that you're taking the same deduction on absolutely everyone's paper. So that consistency is really, really key. We can't divorce ourselves of a certain amount of subjectivity in the grading, but if we're consistent, that makes all the difference in the world. And if you stick to the assignment description and use that really as your rubric, that can be a huge assistance. Those of you who are new TAs, make sure you're using your returning TAs as resources for grading to have them show you how they usually go about things. And along those notes, I think it is a good time to mention that some of you need to update on eCompanion your pre-lab grades. If you don't know how to convert those from the 25 points that it looks like they're out of to the 2.5, please let me know and I'll show you that in lab. So that's just another grading task that maybe we should take our attention to as the semester waxes along. As we move along then, I thought I would bring up something that perhaps relates very nicely to what we've just covered in lab, and maybe something that you'll want to bring your students' attention to in current events, or particularly those in Gen Micro, maybe for those that maybe haven't come up with a good topic. Cal's going to help me. This is Cal, for those of you who haven't met him. So maybe if they haven't found a good topic for their posters, most of them had, but I thought I would draw your attention to it anyway, such a incredibly important and poignant problem right now, and that is extensively drug-resistant tuberculosis, or XDR-TB. XDR-TB is something that is being experienced worldwide, though it is in high concentrations in Africa. And XDR-TB is defined by being resistant to many, many of the drugs that are typically used to treat it. For example, rifampin is one of the most common ones used to treat it. But isoniazid is also common, and it's resistant to both of those. Plus, it's resistant to any fluoroquinolone and at least 3 injectable second-line drugs. So this is badass resistance. This is something that really we can't overstate the importance of finding solutions for this resistance. So I thought this was worth bringing to your attention, and one of the articles that I was reading today, actually on the library's Web of Knowledge, was putting this into sort of a different terms. I mean, we know that there's so much cost to antibiotic resistance and overuse and misuse of antibiotics, but maybe you've never thought about that in terms of actual monetary cost. And this article puts it into that terms. It essentially talks about the fact that for every case that of XDR TB that has to be treated, and they're talking about South Africa explicitly, it costs about $26,392. Comparing that to drug-sensitive tuberculosis at $257 per patient, that's huge. So a massive difference even in monetary cost, not to mention all of the other costs of allowing for drug resistance. Okay, I'm going to draw your attention just briefly then to the TA guidelines for lab number 4, and then moving along, we've already talked a bit about lab 4 into labs 5 and 6. Just a quick reminder on lab 4, just to make sure that we have pictures of endospore and capsule stains on the board, and also to recognize that we need to have our students begin with the capsule stain. So they need to make that capsule stain slide, and they need to have that drying, air drying, while we go through the introductory lecture, which is actually a pretty substantial lecture. So we will see that being a time sink a little bit. So it's important to be organized and prepared ahead of time, really get the students started even as they come in. Also, we want to remind the students that they need to read Lab 5 ahead of time or very carefully go through the virtual edge for Lab 5. So a lot of good TA guidelines for this lecture, a lot of helpful things to say if you are giving the lecture, but I also want to draw your attention to the fact that although we will do the endospore and capsule stains, we won't do the flagella stain. So once again, make sure you have the students look back at that flagella stain demo that'll be set up in the back of the room. I'll leave lab 4 at that so we can just briefly go on and talk about lab 5. Perhaps one of the most important labs that we do, this really does introduce culturing and the use of selective and differential media, defined and undefined media. It's something that will be with us throughout the entire rest of the semester. So very important lecture. Please, 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 on this lecture, unless you are uber prepared to give the portion talking about dilution problems and how to use the C1V1 equals C2V2 method versus using the more pictorial approach, have me do that part. You know, if you want to prepare for the rest of the lecture and then hand it over to me, that's totally fine. Or if you just want me to take the whole lecture on this one, please do let me know. Speaking of which, make sure you are signed up for the lectures that are up and coming, so that we make sure we have coverage on all of those. One thing that I do want all TAs to be ready to do, and maybe agree upon who will actually do it, is to make sure you can demonstrate aseptic technique. The students need to do this on the practical, but they just really need to know it, right? They're going to be doing it a lot. So please make sure you're able to demo it. And remember that demoing it is not the same as knowing how to do it. Demoing it means knowing how to teach it. So go to Virtual Edge, watch it on Virtual Edge, think about how you might say things, how you might show things, how you might go about teaching this skill as opposed to just knowing how to do it. It's two very different things. So be ready for that when we come to Lab 5 for most of you on Wednesday or Thursday. So I think that's largely it on Lab 5, although there's a lot given there to help you with the lecture, so you can review those guidelines at your leisure. I'm going to say just a brief word about Lab 6 because only T and Elia will be going on to that one this week, but in doing so, you guys will want to have a table on the board that allows you to summarize Lab 5 results, and that'll be helpful. One thing to note about that is students get confused as to why they're putting their group name up there and the number they got for their titer. The purpose of that is to get them through that calculation, and if they have to record it on the board, then that actually inspires them to get through the calculation. And then the nice thing about that is you can show them that although they all started from the same culture, they didn't all get the exact same results. So that's a nice demonstration of how there can be a random scatter and random error in our results, no matter whether you're starting from the same sample at the beginning or not. It's a good time to talk about error, and I often use it for that purpose. A quick note on counting the colonies, make sure they do only count the plates with between 30 and 300 colonies on them. It's not too soon to talk about how that's the statistically significant set of plates, so make sure they do kind of start to get to understand that in their statistical approach. Also, again, we have the second really important skill that will be on the practical exam presented in Lab 6, and that is T-streaking. So we want to make sure that we do a great job of demoing T-streaking, and you can really do it up and, you know, be funny about the fact that we're going streaking, but make sure you know how to show them how to streak. Generally, what we do with the lecture on this one is to give the very first part of the lecture, then pause, have them do their streaking, and then come back and do the environmental influences section of the lecture. That way we know that everybody really does a good job of doing their T-streaks. You can look at the bottoms of their plates, give them suggestions based upon seeing the streak marks on there. So it's a good time to really individualize your instruction, really help them get to be good streakers. Okay, I think that does everything for Lab 6, except for obviously you want to look through that for a few pointers if you are giving the lecture. Lots of cool pictures for environmental influences. And for those of you who maybe haven't been in the lab for a while, there is a change here as compared to when we did do the lab. We are now looking at acidophiles and alkalinophiles from locations that we have pictures of where we actually isolated them this last summer. So it's a super fun change in the lab where we're looking at a Leadville acid mine drainage site, and we're looking at a lake bed that's an alkaline flat near Laramie. So those are really cool and apply new changes to the lab for those of you who haven't been in the lab, weren't in the lab last semester. So that should be wicked fun, and I hope you all had a great weekend, and I'll see you soon.